Did y'all survive the rainstorm that started the season of 2022? I did. I wanted to bring you guys a full game day vlog, but the storm kind of messed up those plans. I had to go home because I couldn't wait 3 hours. Got dogs to let out, things to do. So yeah, 31-0. That's what we got. We saw football. Football happened, and we enjoyed it. It was good. That defense is ridiculous. This Texas A&M defense is going to cause so many problems in the SEC in whatever Texas A&M does. Defensive line, huge rotation. We saw Walter Nolan, Shamar Stewart, Anthony Lucas, LT Overton, and Ian White quite a bit this game. We saw Fadil Diggs, Isaiah Rakes. They both tore it up. There was no pocket for this quarterback. And this quarterback on Sam Houston was very elusive, a great scrambler. Give him a ton of credit for avoiding a lot of sacks and still keeping plays alive. Kudos to him. But this defensive line, it's a menace. It's going to be a problem, and it's only going to get better and better. Not only this year, but over the next 3 years. I mean, it's crazy. It's really, really good. Linebackers, an area of concern as far as depth goes. But we saw 3 guys look really good out there and only 2 play at a time. Chris Russell Jr. had some good moments, but Andre White looked really good. And he got nicked up. I hope he's okay to go next week versus App State. Andre White had 2 tip balls, one of which resulted in interception, flying around, getting to the right spot. And, of course, Edge Cooper's there. Had a quiet game, but we know what Edge can do. Defensive backs, extremely solid, extremely stout. Antonio Johnson had a quiet game, but still was fitting in the right spot at the right time. Antonio's going to do what he does. Damani seems like whenever there's a run play and his assignment clears, he is on the play. Damani is just a leader out there. He knows where to be. I really like Jordan Gilbert. This guy flew all over the field, got his hands on a ball. He's as advertised. If you listen to this guy talk, he has a very willing to learn nature. This guy wants to get better. He realizes that he's behind some veterans and was behind Leon O'Neal last year, and he has Antonio Johnson and Damani to look up to. Bunch of safety guys. And Antonio was a safety. He's playing nickel now by necessity, and he's great at it. But he has a lot of guys whose brains he can pick, and I think Jordan Gilbert is going to be special and, dare I say, an upgrade at that safety spot. Maybe not right away, but in a few games, I think we'll be looking at Jordan as a serious threat on that defense. And then the other corner, Brian George. Well, I guess he's the first corner I've brought up. But Brian George looks solid out there. Jalen Jones didn't play. We saw some Tyreek Chappelle. He got beat once, overthrew the ball. The quarterback overthrew the ball, didn't result in anything, but he got beat once. But he had a big tip at another point in the game. I think Chappelle will be all right, but I really hope Jalen Jones comes back. He's supposed to be back versus App State. I don't know what's going on with him. And McKinley Jackson's out. But this defense is ahead of where I thought it would be. The defense is much further wrong, especially up front on that D-line. Everybody filled in nicely. I think they can get a lot better, but the starting point I thought would be here. The starting point's actually up here, a lot closer to where they can be. They're much closer to their potential than we thought a young / fresh group of starters would look. So very encouraging stuff from the defense. You held Sam Houston to 0 points, and I don't care who it is. If you're holding them to 0, that's a big deal. And they were solid throughout the game, but there were a couple of drives where Sam Houston looked like they were putting together some plays, getting some momentum. And both times, A&M came up with very timely turnovers. And that is a hallmark of a great defense. You have to have timing. I mean, some defenses are ridiculous, like Georgia last year. But this defense had great timing with those turnovers. And I look for that to continue. I think turnovers are going to be a key because A&M has not been a very turnover-heavy team the last couple of years. That could really take this defense to the next level, especially if they're going to be as solid as they were up front. Walter Nolan and Ian White, they stood out to me. They just drove their guys back. And Nolan doing it on double teams as a true freshman that lost weight coming into camp, who missed parts of camp. This guy's a freak. He's a freak. I mean, he's getting freaky out there, and he's destroying double teams. It's insane. Go watch the tape. Anyways, that's the rotation. Walter Nolan's not even starting, and McKinley Jackson's not even there yet. I'm very, very encouraged. I thought specifically the D-line would take a few games, and by Miami they'd be where they are now, maybe. So that bodes very well. And it gives this offense time to get on schedule. Because the offense, let's face it, the offense is a little bit behind where we had hoped. And that's not across the board. Receivers look really good and deep. And we have a rotation. I mean, Keith Brown coming out of the woodwork, grabbing a deep ball for a touchdown. As far as I'm concerned, Keith had 2 touchdowns on the day. That second block to free up Anias was nasty. That guy was down for a solid 20 seconds after he got blasted on that go route to Anias. And then, of course, Anias had 160 yards on the day, was as good as ever, getting open, fielding punts. You feel so secure with Anias fielding your punts, but Anias Smith, solid player. But I think the real story of the day, because we expect that from Anias, we've heard the talks of Keith, and for it to come to fruition is great. But the 2 true freshmen, Chris Marshall, Evan Stewart. Chris Marshall looks like the kind of guy that, yeah, A&M might not have that go-to tight end, at least to start the year out. Sometimes these things take time to develop. Jalen Weidemeyer wasn't a huge factor until about a third of the way through the season. His breakout performance in his freshman year was versus Bama, where he finally caught some touchdown passes, I believe, if memory serves. But look for Chris Marshall to be that kind of big-bodied, sure-handed, safety valve / red zone threat that Jimbo Fisher has been known to utilize since he's been at Texas A&M. It started with Jay Sternberger, and then it was obviously Weidemeyer for the last few years. But Chris Marshall looks like he can fill out that role on this offense. I mean, he just high-pointing balls, grabbing the balls in traffic, big body. And then, of course, Evan Stewart's your do-it-all. I mean, he'll catch and run. He'll break some routes. I mean, Haynes was looking for Evan Stewart on those go routes. He was trying to force the ball to Evan. He did it twice. I mean, Haynes didn't care about a safety. He wanted the ball to go to Evan Stewart. And we'll talk about Haynes in a second. But those 5 right there, and Jimbo's going to do a lot of 2-receiver and 3-receiver stuff, but those 5 will make a solid rotation. And then you have Chase Lane, who's reliable, and you can slot him in anywhere, anytime. And he's not necessarily a huge plus guy, but he's definitely not a negative. And he can definitely maintain the offense. We saw a little bit of it last game. Evan Stewart got the toe drag, though, and Chase Lane didn't. Evan Stewart's ridiculous. That toe drag was nice. I think he had 2 of them that game. Chase Lane tried to get one. We saw them drilling it in camp in the clips that we saw. Shout out Aggie Yell, Tex Ags, everybody who posted clips from camp. Those are really helpful and enlightening. But we saw that toe drag drill by the receivers throughout camp, and that really, really came into form this game. But yeah, Evan Stewart got it, and Chase Lane almost got it, but he didn't. Chase Lane just missed that toe drag by a couple inches on the sideline. But Chase Lane's reliable. He's going to be there. And then the guys you didn't see, Moose Muhammad, Jalen Preston, Noah Thomas, those are your emergency situation guys right now? I mean, in an emergency. I mean, oh no, you have to play Jalen Preston. I mean, that's a great luxury to have. Because Jalen Preston's seen it all, done it all. He finished the year strong in 2021. And he's not even in like the down-to-down rotation. He's a backup. So, receiving core, we have a receiving rotation, folks. I mentioned tight end. One of my main question marks that I am apprehensive about, and I am apprehensive about not being resolved quickly, is the tight end position. Crownover had to play some tight end this game, and just in a blocking role. I don't think he's going to be much of a receiving tight end, even though he does have some athleticism about him, played basketball in high school, but he was a tackle all camp, I believe. At least that's what reports say. But with Max Wright and Blake Smith both being out, he was forced to be the first tight end on the field. And as a blocker, that's great. He's a big body. He's not very experienced, but I think I don't think it's ideal. We saw Donovan Green block a little bit. Looks pretty good. I think he has some ways to go in the physicality, definitely in the experience department. He went out there. We didn't see much of Max Johnson's brother. What's his first name? We didn't see much of Johnson out there until mop-up duty. Jake Johnson. I think he looked good in camp in the pictures and the images we saw, but we don't really know what's going on. Maybe in the blocking game he's not as good. But you really miss Max Wright, and I think for that reason we did a lot of four receiver sets with a running back and just matching up O-line and D-line, no tight end, no extra blockers. And I don't think that worked out too well for the run game, not having that go-to tight end. That and the O-line has some work to do. And I think it's doable work, but like I said about tight end, the things I'm nervous about this team not resolving quickly, O-line also falls into this group for me. There is nothing with this O-line that is unfixable. They're physical, they have size, they have talent. For the most part, they're violent. I want to see a little bit more violence from Trey Zune, but being a first game starting at Texas A&M, I understand everything's going a million miles an hour, and maybe you don't focus on X aspect of your game every play, but that's why they go back to the film and back to practice. I don't think there's anything deficient about this offensive line. I think it's experience, it's playing together, and it's thinking on the fly. Because everything that beat this O-line, besides a couple of moments inside I'll bring up in a second, but for the most part, what stuffed the run game was twists, blitzes, showing blitzes, and then the offensive line not being able to pick up the assignment. The twist was the main issue. There were many twists where the left guard and left tackle, neither of them picked up a guy, and both came through and tackled Achane in the backfield. Achane had a lot of negative plays because of this, and the running game really suffered because of this. They were doing it the whole game. And I don't know, maybe I don't know if you'll see that much from a SEC opponent. You might just see some more, you'll see less twists and stuff like that. But that's the kind of thing that scares you because that's on film now. So I imagine with the O-line, specifically the center, left guard, left tackle, the newer guys, that's going to be drilled this week. It's going to be brought up this week. It's going to be addressed. But how much can you accomplish in a regular season? We expected Bryce Foster, and he has mono. We don't know when he's going to come back. We don't know where he's going to play. Matthew Wyckoff was getting blasted a little bit in there. They were sending both tackles at him and just driving him back. For the most part, pass blocking as an offensive line was extremely solid. Haynes had a great pocket for most of the night. But when those D tackles were getting on Wyckoff, that's when they were getting the push. And Wyckoff's a taller center, and a lot of times those shorter D tackles can stand you up. Or push you down if you're trying to bend over too low. So I look for a lot of that left offensive line and center stuff to really be addressed this week. I mean, it's the first game they've played together. There's a lot more turnover on this O-line than we thought. I mean, you lose maybe your most anticipated guy coming into the year besides, maybe Layden Robinson, but I think we were all very excited to see Bryce Foster this year, and he's not there. So offensive line, we need to see development going from Sam Houston to App State. That's where we need to see the growth because, in my opinion, that's why the offense suffered. It wasn't because of Haynes King. And yes, Haynes King has a long ways to go. Might as well talk about him right now. He's the last piece we haven't talked about. And Achane. But I think if you tell the story of the O-line, you tell the story of Achane. I'll bring up a couple more things with him in a second. But Haynes King, I loved a lot about his game. I did. But there's a couple things that I really didn't like that I think will clean up. I am much less worried about Haynes King than I am the O-line and the tight ends. Because when you're a starting quarterback and you were the starter last year and you had to go the whole year watching and learning and thinking and visualizing, and then you go the whole offseason doing the same thing, training, knowing you have a damn good chance to be the starter, you're in your head a lot, you're thinking about it a lot, but you haven't done it. And when you get in there, sometimes your own expectations of yourself or your own expectations of the situation, as much as you've practiced and visualized, don't necessarily match up to what you're seeing, plus the first game jitters of being the guy. And of course, that's an excuse anybody could make, but it was his first game, and he's only had one full game under his belt before. That all being said, he threw 64%, 360 yards, 3 touchdowns. If you ask national media or go look at Twitter, which, why am I citing that? But if you go look at Twitter, Haynes King sucks. He's awful. Can't read a defense. I will give you that he was throwing some extremely risky balls, and he was doing it over and over again in the first half. I mean, I was convinced that he thought safeties were a conspiracy theory. I was convinced that, you know, that they were Bigfoot to him and that it was Jimbo's job to convince him otherwise. He cleaned it up in the second half. But a lot of that stuff, he was being courageous. He was willing to throw that deep ball, and we haven't had that under Mond or Calzada. We haven't had a guy that's willing to throw that ball, and he was going for it all night, and he wanted to get Evan Stewart that deep ball. A couple of those balls, yes, he threw it into double coverage, but if he puts a little more oomph on it, he's throwing that receiver open. So maybe he's not seeing the safety, or maybe he's not putting enough on it. And I think a couple of those he didn't see the safety. But definitely a couple of those he could have thrown the guy open. And that's part of that in-game situation where everything's happening faster in your first game back. You've got nerves. You're not as crisp. You're not thinking as freely. Your autopilot's not running as smoothly. And I think a lot of that gets cleaned up. And I think Haynes King, even after that cleanup, is the kind of guy where you're just going to take the bruises with it. And you're just going to take it as it comes. You're going to get a pick or two every game. But you're also going to get 360 yards. You're also going to get running ability. And the best thing about Haynes King, in my opinion, after watching, I've rewatched the game once, and I was at the game, obviously, as you saw. You don't see this from the stands, but I loved his demeanor, his eyes, his nature after these mistakes, after the big plays, even keeled. Very Kellen Mond, Kellen Mond never got too high, too low, and that was arguably his best trait. His toughness and his nature. He never got too high or too low. He was steady. And I think Haynes has that trait with a better arm than Kellen and a more willing deep ball thrower than Kellen. And I will stand by this. I think Haynes King will be better than Kellen Mond, and Kellen was damn good by his senior year. I think Kellen will be at that level pretty quickly. I think Haynes will be at that level pretty quickly. So, yes, he has a solid backup, but I think Haynes King, if he cleans it up just a little bit, if he cleans that game up just a little bit, what's that stat line? What's this offense looking like? If Haynes King has a running game, if his offensive line picks up those twists and blitzes better, what kind of game does Haynes have? How does that game look if A&M scores 42, 49 points? A little bit better. So I'm very, very encouraged by Haynes King still. We will see what happens. Achane got nothing going. I was surprised that most of his rushes came between the tackles. And I know Jimbo is a very secretive guy with the playbook. Maybe there's some more creative stuff coming. Actually, I know there is. That's how Jimbo is. Jimbo's whole thing is no tendencies. You can't predict what they're going to do next. Hiding the playbook, adding wrinkles as the season goes on. And everybody does that, but that is Jimbo's mantra. So, yeah, I was surprised by lack of outside run, creative stuff for Achane, swings, screens. There were a couple of them. I look for that to increase as the season goes on. Didn't get much going, but that was a lot due to the offensive line stuff. And I think that was the biggest deficiency of the offense and why they only scored 31 points was there was no rush game. There was no run game. They had the one drive after the delay where they just decided they were going to force the issue, and it was good for the most part. I did not like how they finished the drive in the red zone. It took a few more plays than I thought it might have to punch that thing in. You have a Naismith at fullback, which, yeah, I know he can go slap someone up, but you really want that big body in there to lean on those linebackers. He was getting a piece of him, slowing him down, but not stopping him. But it opens up other things having Anais there, though. He has enough where he can do that, but then he's such a threat in the passing or running game there. Interesting formation. But I look for this team, this offense, to improve greatly from Game 1 to Game 2. A&M has opened up as only a 17-point favorite versus App State. I think A&M matches up really nicely with them. I'll talk more about that game in a day or two. But I look for them to go back to assignments, offensive line-wise, a plan of action for when these things are happening, these twists, these stunts. I look for that O-line to be somewhat better, but I look for Haynes King to be a lot better week 1 to week 2. And I think the O-line will be a work in progress. I think you hope for Bryce back, but you can't expect it because Bryce has not really been there for a long time. He's only really practiced a couple of weeks, and that's in the middle of being sick. So I'm not getting my hopes up for Bryce. Wyckoff was getting blasted in there, but I'm hoping he can just brush that off and get to where he can hold his own. But we might be looking at a spread style offense here, guys, if this run offense doesn't get going that Jimbo is so accustomed to using, and there's a lack of tight end ability. I mean, we know there's youth there. There's great young tight ends, but how long will it take for them to be SEC Power 5 ready? How much is Jimbo hiding for Miami? How much is Jimbo going to show versus App State? This is all stuff we're going to have to find out. We'll find out together. You know, I think this goes for the team, but it also goes for us as fans. And I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but I'll break it down one last time before I get out of here. This defense is going to give the offense the opportunity to develop. The defense will keep this team in games up until they play Alabama. And you know what? Miami scored 70 points against Betty. They scored 70 points against Betty. Their offense looks really good. I think A&M has the defense that can answer that. So they will have time to get their stuff together offensively. And as fans, we can rest assured that that defense will be there. And we don't have to worry because we are up here with the defense and we're a little bit lower on the offense as far as our perception and what we hoped would happen. So we have that to rest on. 0 points is 0 points. They can definitely build on that. And there's a lot they can do to get better. But I'll stay hopeful that this offense can improve most. I mean, they say the most improvement happens from the first to second game. I think Jimbo did mention that, or someone asked that in the press conference today. And that's always been true. That's always been something that coaches say. Because you actually go out there and you do the thing. You go play the game you've been training for in the manner that you've been training for it to be played in. You play in a real game setting. You get actual samples that you can actually go in there and tweak and see what the response is in these samples. But yeah, guys, that's my review on the game. I'm going to watch the replay probably a couple more times, as y'all are probably going to do as well. But I look for a lot of improvement to be made. It was a weird game with that weather delay. Who knows what that second half could have been. But I'm very hopeful. I'm very encouraged by this defense. I think the Aggies will get a lot better.